What image comes to mind when you hear the phrase Russian woman? Usually it appears in three types of discourse. First, a Western man disillusioned with feminism looks for a traditional wife from Russia, Ukraine, or any other Slavic country. The promise is she will cook borscht, tolerate his habits, not argue, and not demand equality. She is the living antithesis of the strong Western independent woman, and therefore a valuable resource for conservatively minded patriarchal men in the 21st century, which they see as having bent under the weight of feminism. Second, the Russian gold digger, or Slavic bimbo. A girl who sells beauty and youth to a wealthy sponsor. She is on an endless hunt for others' people, resources, and a sense of security. She is cold, calculating, even dangerous. Third, the strong Russian woman, the one who carries the family, work, and household all on her shoulders, survives in humane conditions, and never complains. This third image, I feel, seems to be a bit less popular on the international stage. Perhaps it's less marketable or interesting, and it probably refers less to the current generation of young Russian women and more to the generations of our mothers and grandmothers. However, within the former Soviet space, it might be the most common type of all. In any case, all three of these images are enduring stereotypes, and each of them has a real cultural lineage. This video is about where these images came from, how they connect to the great Russian literature of the 19th century, and why they still shape how the Russian woman is seen and how she sees herself. Привет everyone, my name is Aida, and here in this channel I share bits of Russian culture from a native's perspective. And in this video I'll try to debunk, or maybe confirm, the myth of the Russian woman. If content on culture and literature is your cup of tea, subscribe to the channel for more. And before we continue, a disclaimer. Everything I'm about to say is not an academic concept reviewed by professional historians, philologists, or gender theorists. I have no ambition to offer a new framework for understanding Russian culture. This is just a series of observations, a personal, subjective perspective shaped by reading 19th and 20th century Russian literature, watching Soviet and post-Soviet films, and inevitably by lived experience in the culture that I'm talking about. I'm simply inviting you to reflect and offering some structure for further discussion in the comments. Female archetypes in world culture are often based on age and the main life stages of a woman. This gives us three basic stages to use as a framework, which we can then layer with the specific traits of the Russian or Slavic woman. These three stages are the maiden, the mature woman, and the old woman. So let's begin. Part 1. The maiden. Eve, Lilith, and the Holy Prostit. Let's start with the first stage, the maiden, a young woman not yet married, not yet a mother. Here we can identify two poles, light femininity and dark femininity. In Christian culture, these are often associated with the archetypal figures of Eve and Lilith. Eve, light femininity. So who is Eve in the biblical tradition? Born from Adam's rib, she is meant to complete what he lacks. Being with her, enriched as a man, creates the conditions for his self-actualization, for the full development of his potential. Eve is not an independent entity. Ontologically and functionally, she is a complement to a man. This type is often associated with youthful spontaneity, lack of experience, a romanticized view of the world, trust in people, and moral purity. In 19th century Russian culture, this biblical archetype took the form of what we call the Turgenev girl. Ivan Turgenev, the same Turgenev that you might know as the author of Fathers and Sons, created a remarkable literary female character who eventually became a stereotype not only in literature but in the works of other Russian classics. Mariana from Virgin Soil, Elena from On the Eve, Natalia from Rudin, Lisa from A House of Gentlefolk, Asa, Varya, Susanna, all of these young women are Turgenev's creations and direct representatives of this type. So what is this image? The Turgenev girl was a young lady, raised in nature with high moral and spiritual qualities. She is quiet, gentle, dreamy, romantic, self-sacrificing, and capable of great deeds for the sake of others. Her appearance is quite unremarkable. She is not strikingly beautiful. At first glance, she makes no strong impression. Many consider her plain. Her potential unfolds not immediately, but over time. The climax of the story usually comes when the girl falls in love. That is the moment of her personal growth and spiritual awakening. Speaking about contemporary parallels, this archetype hasn't disappeared totally, it has transformed. In the West, the image of the Russian woman as traditional, family-oriented, untainted by feminism, this is the expert version of the Turgenev girl. The Western man looking for a wife from Russia is often looking for exactly this, a girl who will complement him, who will not compete, but serve him, the home, the household, the family. But there is also a simplification. The Turgenev girl was a noble woman. She had governesses, servants, and the luxury of not working. Today's traditional wife is often a woman for whom traditionalism is not a luxury, but sometimes the only way she knows how to live, and a forced survival strategy. Lilith, dark femininity. If Eve represents acceptance of the patriarchal order, Lilith is its radical rejection. In medieval mystical tradition, Lilith was Adam's first wife, created not from his rib, but from the same clay. That is why she refuses to submit. She speaks the ineffable name of God and flies away. In European culture, Lilith became the archetype of a woman who does not serve, does not obey, does not repay attention with love. She can be cold, she may use a man for her own purposes, she may simply feel nothing for him. In the patriarchal mindset, such a woman is demonized. Within that framework, a woman is supposed to be warm, caring, responsive, and if she doesn't return affection, she's a bitch, a liar, a user. If she gets what she wants, she's a manipulator. In Russian literature, Lilith appears as, for example, Nastasya Filippovna in Dostoevsky's The Idiot. The patriarchal society sees her as an object to be bought, sold, traded, or discarded. Tolstoy wants to sell her. Rogozhin wants to buy her. Ganya wants her dowry. Everyone wants to use her in some way. And Nastasya responds by setting fire to the very symbol of a market value, her own price tag. She chooses not to serve. She refuses to be the complement to any man. Instead, she becomes destructive to others, but most of all to herself. She humiliates her suitors. She torments her guardian. She rejects the gentle, compassionate prince who offers to help her because she believes that she is unworthy of salvation. And in the end, she runs away with Rogozhin, the man who abused her, and at the end, no spoilers. Nastasya Filippovna is not simply evil. She is traumatized, intelligent, proud, and desperate, but within the framework of the Lilith archetype, she fits perfectly. She does not love in return when society expects her to. She refuses to be owned. She disrupts every transaction men try to arrange around her, and she is ultimately destroyed, partly by others, but largely by her own self-destructive choices. In this sense, Dostoevsky's Nastasya is the 19th century Russian answer to the question, what happens to Lilith when she is trapped in a world that only wants her to be Eve? In the 20th century, Bulgakov created another version of this archetype, Margarita from The Master and Margarita, probably his most famous work. She is not a victim of circumstance. She chooses. When Azazello offers her a deal, she agrees instantly. Here is a key difference from Nastasya Filippovna. Nastasya is torn by internal conflict. She both wants love and considers herself unworthy of it. Margarita doesn't overthink. She knows what she wants and she pursues it across any boundary, including the boundaries between good and evil. In this sense, Margarita is Lilith who won, or more precisely, Lilith who was finally allowed not to be punished. She does not die like Anna Karenina, she is not destroyed like Nastasya Filippovna. She gets what she wants, and the author does not condemn her for it. But there is still a shadow. Margarita receives peace, not light, as highlights Bulgakov. And in this lies the ambivalence of the writer's Lilith. She is stronger than her predecessors. She receives an award, but that reward is not the triumph of life. It is beautiful, but lifeless peace. The contemporary parallel of Lilith archetype. To be clear, the types that I'm about to discuss here are not directly derived from these literary characters of Margarita or Nastasya Filippovna. Rather, they are contemporary expressions of the Lilith archetype itself. I'm talking about the Russian gold digger and the Slavic bimbo. What are these from a cultural analysis perspective? These are women who have accepted the rules of the patriarchal market with absolute honesty. The market says, A young, beautiful woman is worth more than an old or unattractive one. A man is valued by his wallet, a woman by her looks. The gold digger does not reject this rule. She just takes it to its logical extreme. She converts her beauty and youth into money, security, and status. She doesn't ask for love, she just demands payment. The bimbo is a hyperbolized version of the same logic. Inflated lips, tight dresses, extremely high heels. She is a spectacle. She demonstrates with her look. I am a body, and I have made this body as expensive as possible. The paradox is that the gold digger and the bimbo are not breaking patriarchal rules. They are following them so literally that it becomes a parody. They are saying to men, you wanted to judge me by my looks? Fine, I'll send you the bill. Is this a form of protest or capitulation? Probably the latter. But even in this capitulation, there is an element of aggression. The gold digger does not serve a man, she uses him. She is not Eve completing what he lacks, she is Lilith extracting resources. Interestingly, this image provokes rage, not only in women but also in men, because it reveals an uncomfortable truth that in the patriarchal game, men don't always win either. Sometimes they become victims of their own rules. And here we move to the third, strangest phenomenon, the image in which Eve and Lilith are not opposed, but fused together. The Holy Prostitute, Madonna, not whore. Russian culture has an archetype that has almost no parallel in the West. It is the image of a woman who is both fallen and holy. The essence of this image lies in combining two seemingly opposite traits. On one hand, we have social or moral fall. It can be prostitution or extramarital affairs that are, of course, condemned by society. And on the other hand, we have inner moral purity, capacity for compassion and self-sacrifice, and spiritual strength that affects other characters. Such a character often turns out to be morally superior to the respectable people around her. The most famous example is Sonia Marmeladova from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Sonia is the daughter of a drunkard and his sick wife. The family is in poverty. The children are starving. Her stepmother reproaches Sonia for idleness and, in essence, sends her to the streets. Sonia goes, of course not out of lust or the love for money, but out of sheer desperation, because there is no other way to feed the family. She sacrifices herself for others. To make it more obvious, Dostoevsky uses Christian symbolism here. She brings home 30 silver coins, exactly as much as Judas received for his betrayal of Christ. Sonia is a willing sacrifice. She betrays her purity as Judas betrayed Christ, but she does it not for herself, only for others. And this self-betrayal has redemptive power. Sonia arguably is the strongest character in the novel, and it is only through this inner light that she saves both herself and Raskolnikov. The image of Holy Prostitute recurs throughout Russian literature. Nastasya Filippovna in Dostoevsky, yes, she's not a prostitute, but another fallen woman in society's eyes. Grushenka in The Brothers Karamazov, Lisa in Notes from Underground, Katya Maslova in Tolstoy's Resurrection, and the heroines of Kuprin's The Pit, and many, many more. In Dostoevsky, as well as the poet Nikolai Nekrasov's work, such heroine just tries to feed her family. She does it out of despair and poverty, sacrificing herself for others. In 19th century Russian literature, especially with Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, Christian ideas are central. Salvation through suffering, the possibility of moral rebirth, the superiority of inner truth over social status, and the value of humility and self-sacrifice. Thus, the fallen woman becomes not a symbol of debauchery, but proof that holiness is possible even in extreme humiliation. So, in the most general terms, the Holy Prostit archetype is the perception of a prostitute as a woman who sacrificed herself, who transgressed, yes, who committed a crime, but who transgressed against herself for the sake of others. So why is this relevant for understanding modernity? First, I think it helps us understand the romanticization of female self-sacrifice that still remains culturally pervasive. The image of Sonia Marmeladova and similar female heroines can reinforce the idea that a woman must endure, sacrifice herself as long as she can remain an endless source of support for others. And the plot in which a heroine helps a man through a crisis and moral transformation is still extremely common. Secondly, separation of external and internal morality. This archetype shows that social condemnation does not necessarily reflect a person's true moral worth. This can contribute to a more complex and less judgmental view of women whose lives do not conform to traditional norms. Finally, aestheticization of suffering. In Russian cultural tradition, suffering, and definitely not only female, is often seen as a path to truth and spiritual depth. This can strengthen respect for resilience, but it can also lead to the idealization of painful, unequal relationships, romanticization of depression, and other destructive mental states. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I'm only starting out, so your support will be of great help. For those who want to go the extra mile and help directly, please consider becoming a sponsor of the channel on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thank you so much. Part 2. The Woman. The Real Russian Baba, the Nekrasov Woman, and the Soviet Legacy. Now we move to the second stage, the mature woman. Here, Russian culture created an image radically different from the Western one. This is not the weaker sex, this is the sex that works, and works a lot, and works hard. The peasant woman in Imperial Russia, or the real Russian Baba. When talking about the mature Russian woman, we cannot ignore the word Baba. This is a very specific concept with no direct equivalent in Western European languages. English, woman, or German, Frau are neutral. Baba, in the peasant context, meant not just a woman, but a woman of lower class, married, usually already a mother, with clearly defined duties. Unlike Devka, unmarried young woman, or Barishnya, noble woman, the Baba is the one who works, heavily, regularly, without breaks. The peasant family was a production unit. Children were viewed primarily as labor. A woman gave birth not because she was destined for motherhood, but because the fields needed workers. The average peasant family had 8 to 10 children. Of this, 4 to 6 survived to adulthood. The rest just died of disease, cold, and malnutrition. A mother could not afford prolonged mourning. She had to feed the surviving children and give birth to more. So what exactly did a peasant woman do? Let's see. First, field work. Women plowed, harrowed, reaped, mowed, and tied sheaves. During the harvest season, the workday lasted from dawn to dusk, 14 to 16 hours. The division of labor by gender was weak. Men did the heavier work, like breaking new ground, for example, but women did almost everything else, plus additional duties. Second, housework. Cooking for a large family, often 10 to 15 people, in a wood-fired stove without gas or electricity. Stoking that same stove, caring for livestock, cows, chicken, pigs, milking, feeding, cleaning the barns, spinning and weaving, because the family's clothes were woven at home, of course, taking up all the dark hours, especially in winter. Third, children. They had to be watched, fed, treated. There were no maternity leaves or diapers. A mother would take her infant to the field, leaving it in the shade under a tree or in a special hanging cradle tied to a tree or a cart. Fourth, no complaints. This is not a virtue. It is a survival condition. It's how everyone lives. There was no one to complain to. Husbands drank, landlords demanded dues, authorities didn't listen. A woman who complained was considered lazy and quarrelsome. The one who stayed silent, though, and just kept working, she was respected. In this sense, Baba is a social marker, a status that you could not choose. You were born into it if you were unlucky enough. This type of woman, strong, silent, ready for anything, did not disappear with the abolition of serfdom. She moved to the city, to factory floors, to communal apartments, to Soviet queues. The cultural memory of the Baba, of woman as a beast of burden, became the foundation of the Soviet gender project. And when we talk today about the strong Russian woman who can endure anything, we are talking, often without realizing it, about the heir to that same peasant woman who had no choice but had endurance. The Nekrasov woman, literary embodiment of the peasant woman. It was precisely this reality, the peasant woman who works alongside men, gives birth and does not complain, that Nikolai Nekrasov captured in his poetry. Nekrasov did not invent this image. He observed it from childhood. His mother, Elena Andreevna, endured abuse and humiliation in her husband's manor house. The serf women he saw on his family's estate in Yaroslavl worked in the fields, gave birth, buried their children, and went back to the fields. Nekrasov later wrote, "I have suffered all my life for women." When he began work on the poem Red-Nosed Frost in 1863, he already had an idea. In his drafts, a phrase survives. Baba is a horse in the root. The root horse is the strongest one in the team, bearing the main weight. Nekrasov was looking for an image of a woman who holds up the entire household, and he found it. Here is how he describes such a woman. Examples in odd places reach a calm solemnity, serene in strength and beauty each, with looks and stature of a queen. She'll rush beneath a burning thatch, stop bolting horse dead in its tracks. The main heroine of the poem is the peasant Darya. She is young, beautiful. She has a husband Prokol and 2 children, and when her husband dies of fever, Darya does not lose heart. She harnesses the horse, carries the coffin, buries him, then goes to the forest for firewood because it is winter, because the children need to be kept warm. In the forest, she freezes to death. But even as she freezes, she dreams that her husband is alive, the children are fed, and everything is fine. Nekrasov does not idealize Darya. He shows her exhaustion, her tears, but he also shows her resilience, that even in grief she continues to do what she must. You are proud and do not choose to weep. You are strong, but on the cloth about, involuntarily, the tears that keep on dropping on the new stitched shroud. Tear on tear, they also drop upon the needle-plying hand, as silent as the rice-on crop of seeds is scattered on the land. Later, in the poem Who Lives Well in Russia, Nekrasov created another peasant woman, Matrona Timofeevna Korchagina. She is called the governor's wife because she once got justice from a governor, but her life is a series of losses. The death of her first son, who was eaten by the pigs, beatings from her father-in-law, hunger, humiliation, and she tells it all in a calm voice without any drama. What I'm ordered, I work, she says. No matter how much I'm scolded, I stay silent. Here is the important thing. Nekrasov did not just describe the peasant woman. He poeticized her strength. He made it so that for the Russian reader, the words Russian woman became associated not with weakness or dependence, but with endurance and the capacity to survive anything. To create this image, Nekrasov used folklore. He studied song collections recorded by Pavel Rybnikov and laments of the northern region, funeral laments performed by the peasant woman Irina Fedosova. Matrona speaks in songs and proverbs. Her speech is the voice of the people themselves. This is why the Nekrasov woman became not just a literary type, but a cultural archetype. People who have never even read Nekrasov still know of her. And the phrase, "stop bolting horse dead in its tracks," became a proverb. The strong Russian woman today is no longer just a 19th century peasant. She is also the Soviet factory worker, the modern single mother. But Nekrasov also showed something else. His heroines did not choose to be strong. They had no choice. They were just born into such conditions. Darya freezes in the forest because there is no one else to bring firewood. Matrona works because otherwise her family will starve. Their strength is not a virtue. It is the only possible reaction in such circumstances. The Soviet woman, equality as double burden. Later, this legacy passed to the Soviet woman. The Soviet Union was one of the first countries to grant women equal political rights. Women gained the right to vote, the right to education, the right to a professional career. Women in the Soviet Union worked in factories alongside men. That's true. You may have seen these Soviet posters, such as "Forward Women" or images of young female tractor drivers. This equality is also reflected in one of the most important monuments built in the USSR, Worker and Kolkhoz Woman. A man and a woman standing side by side, a hammer and a sickle above their heads. The monument symbolized not only the union of agriculture and industry working together to build communism, but also gender equality. Women gained the ability to work and immediately became obligated to work. Industrialization demanded hands. Wars decimated the male population. Women stood at the machines, but no one relieved them of their traditional duties. Caring for a husband, cooking with empty stores, childcare with almost no kindergartens in the early decades, washing clothes by hand, cleaning without appliances, standing in lines for food. The Soviet woman worked 2 shifts. The first at the factory or at the office, and the second at home. And no one paid for the second shift. No one even noticed it. This type of woman is captured very well in Soviet cinema. Watch any Soviet film from the 1930s to the 70s. The secondary female characters, neighbors, mothers-in-law, colleagues, female bosses, they're often irritated, grumpy, lamenting their difficult lot, meddling in affairs that aren't theirs, giving advice from the conviction, I know what's best. I remember such examples as Varvara Plush from The Diamond Arm, Nadia and Baba Shura from Love and Pigeons, the neighbors in the communal apartment from Pokrovsky Gates. Viewers today often find these characters annoying, me included. But that annoyance is not really fair. These women did not become this way by choice. Time made them so. Circumstances made them so. They were given more responsibilities that any person could bear. None of the old ones were taken away. But as a reward, they got a poster about equality. The present day, strong woman as burden and brand. What remains of all this today? The post-Soviet space has experienced new shocks. The 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and its aftermath, impoverishment, the disappearance of jobs for men, banditry, the 2000s with social stratification, the 2010s and 2020s with new turbulence, emigration and economic instability. And in all these crises, the gender load has been distributed unevenly. Sociological research shows that in Russian families, women still take on the lion's share of housework and childcare, even when they work full-time. Moreover, in crisis situations, it is often the woman who becomes the emergency exit. She takes on a second job, does freelance work, saves money on herself. The myth of the strong Russian woman is a myth that fits both the patriarchal culture inside Russia and the Western admiration for exotic endurance. The image of the weak but protected woman, sometimes portrayed in the media, I see it in social media very often that, in Russia, women get to be feminine and men masculine, and women receive flowers every day, and he always pays all the bills. This is actually an image of privilege. In reality, Russian women have rarely had privileges, and they do not live like this. And such idealized images, then as now, are only accessible to certain socioeconomic strata. Part 3. The Old Woman. The phenomenon of Babushka. The third stage, the old woman. In Russian culture, the elderly woman has not just an age-related status, but a separate word that has become international, babushka, or as foreigners usually say, babushka. Everybody knows this word. For foreigners, I think babushka is an elderly Russian woman in a headscarf, often stooped, sitting outside her building, knitting, looking stern or conversely, bustling about, feeding her grandchildren pastries. An image simultaneously cozy and unsettling. But what does babushka mean from inside the culture? First, it's not just grandmother in the sense of parent's mother. In everyday Russian life, a babushka is a social role, a woman who has retired but hasn't stopped working. Only now her work is the family. She sits with the grandchildren because the parents are at work. She cooks for the whole family. She goes to the clinic for prescriptions for her sick husband. She knows which medications are cheaper at which pharmacy. She stands in queues if there are any, and if there aren't, she finds them and stands. Second, babushka is authority, informal but very real. In the three-generation household, that was the norm in Russia for a long time. Grandmother, parents, usually just the mother, and children. It is often the grandmother who is the moral authority. She is the elder. No one talks back to her. Her words can be harsh. That's not what you should wear, you're not raising them right, don't use that language in front of me. Third, babushka is memory. She remembers the Soviet Union, shortages, queues, war, if she's over 80, famine. She can tell you what's not in the textbooks. She can tell you the real history. And she will tell you on the subway, at the clinic, on a bench outside the building to a complete stranger, because talking is also her work. And how does this archetype connect to the previous ones? Babushka is often the same Nekrasov woman or Soviet worker 30 or 40 years later. She has not stopped, she has not softened, she has simply changed her front. Instead of the factory, the kitchen and grandchildren, instead of reporting to the party secretary, overseeing how the daughter runs the household. But there is also a shadow side. Babushka can be despotic, her love can be suffocating, her care is control. The phrase, "I know what's best" in her mouth is not up for discussion. Foreigners often do not understand this duality. For them, babushka is just a cozy image only, pastries, mittens, care. But from inside the culture, it is also a heavy burden, because you cannot argue with a grandmother. She's older, she survived the war, she has the right, and you do not. Of course, I cannot speak for all elderly women. As always, it's very individual, but my task here is to describe common archetypes, not every single woman or girl or old lady in Russia. Babushka is perhaps the only archetype also of all that we have discussed that is not romanticized at all. No one sings her praises in poetry, no one idealizes her in film. People respect her, tolerate her, but they do not admire her the way they admire the strong Nekrasov woman or the Turgenev girl. And in this perhaps lies honesty, because old age is not poetry. It is fatigue and authority at the same time. And babushka is the most direct, unadorned face of that contradiction. Okay, so we have explored all three stages now: the maiden, the woman, and the old woman. Here's what can be taken from this analysis. First, the myth of the Russian woman did not arise in a vacuum. Each of today's stereotypes, whether the traditional wife, the gold digger, or the strong woman who carries everything on her shoulders, has a cultural lineage. Turgenev, Dostoevsky, Nekrasov, Soviet and post-Soviet cinema, modern social media all have contributed to shaping these images. A stereotype is not always a lie. Often it's a simplified version of a complex cultural code. Second, all the archetypes we've examined share a common trait. They describe a woman through her relationship to a man, family, or state. Eve completes a man. Lilith refuses to complete him. Sonia saves him. The Nekrasov woman carries the family. The Soviet worker carries the country. Babushka controls the household. In none of these images does a woman exist on her own, outside of service, sacrifice, or resistance. Her value is always defined through function. Third, Russian culture poeticizes female suffering. The Turgenev girl awakens through love, which is almost always unrequited and unhappy. Sonia Marmeladova becomes holy through her fall. The Nekrasov woman evokes admiration precisely because she endures the unbearable. In this tradition, suffering is not a side effect. It's almost a necessary condition for being seen, understood, and valued. This legacy still works today. A woman who is doing well is often perceived as shallow or uninteresting. Fourth, most of these archetypes were formulated by men. Writers, poets, directors. Turgenev, Dostoevsky, Nekrasov, Bloch created images that are still admired, but this admiration is an external gaze. It contains little of the woman's own voice. The question of how well these archetypes correspond to women's actual experience still remains open, or more precisely, it requires a separate conversation. Fifth, the myth of the Russian woman is not just a collection of stereotypes. It is a cultural tool. It is used by those who admire Russia and those who criticize it. It is used by men looking for a traditional wife. It is used by marketers selling the image of the deep Russian soul. It is sometimes used by women themselves, explaining to themselves and to others, "I am this way because that's how things turned out." But a tool remains a tool. It can be analyzed, and perhaps to some extent we can free ourselves from its influence. In this video, I haven't tried to give a definitive answer to the question, what is she really like? Such an answer, of course, doesn't exist. I have tried to show how the cultural images we often take for reality are constructed, and I invite you, the viewer, to assess for yourself whether these images help understanding and whether they get in the way of seeing a living person. And that is all I have for you today. Please subscribe and give this video a like if you liked it. Leave a comment below and tell us what image of a woman exists in your culture. Are there any similar types or something completely different? It would be really interesting for the rest of us to learn, I think. That being said, have a great rest of your day. See you in the next one. Пока.